Hello everyone. If you got lost in the forest at night, with no phone and whispers of unseen entities surrounding you, would you try to run? Or hide and wait for dawn? So, what would you do? Was Mike's experience just a nightmare, or is there a real curse haunting this campsite? Stay tuned to hear the full story, because the darkness of the night might be more terrifying than you think. Mike was excited to plan a camping trip with his college friends. Spending a few days away from the noise of the city, immersed in nature, would do everyone good. The group followed an old mountain road and arrived at a secluded campsite. There was a run-down cabin that hadn't been used for years, but their main goal was to set up tents by the lake and spend the night around a campfire. The first day was perfect. They lit a fire, shared stories, and had drinks. However, as the night wore on, Mike felt the need to use the bathroom and headed into the forest. He had left his phone in the tent, but since he was only going a short distance, he didn't think much of it. But things didn't go as planned. As he moved through the forest, a sudden eerie feeling washed over him. It felt like someone, or something, was watching him. He quickly finished his business and turned back toward the camp, but suddenly, the trees around him all started to look the same. He couldn't tell which way he had come from. His heart pounded, and as he tried to hurry back, he realized with growing fear that he was only getting more lost with each step. Soon, he began to hear whispers from deep within the forest. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but as the sounds became clearer, he realized they were human voices, murmuring in hushed tones. Maybe my friends are trying to scare me, he thought. But the voices were unsettling. They sounded like they were chanting in an ancient language. Mike's skin crawled. He quickened his pace, but suddenly, his foot caught on something, and he fell hard to the ground. He felt his head hit something. Everything went dark. When Mike opened his eyes, everything was blurry. After a few moments, his vision cleared, and he found himself sitting by a large fire, surrounded by unfamiliar faces. The people wore tattered clothing, their faces marked with some kind of war paint. No one spoke, but they were all watching him intently. Is this some kind of joke? Guys! He shouted, but no one responded. His heart pounded in his chest. Suddenly, an old man approached him and spoke in a low voice. You have awakened. There is little time for you to return. Before Mike could ask what he meant, a cold hand touched his shoulder. He turned around and saw a woman staring at him with empty, lifeless eyes. Her face was deathly pale, and her gaze felt like it led into nothingness. She leaned in and whispered, You shouldn't be here. Panic surged through Mike. He shot to his feet, ready to run, but the people around the fire suddenly began shouting and making strange noises. Some reached out toward him, while others fell to their knees, murmuring prayers. Terror consumed him. He turned and sprinted into the forest, but once again, the trees all looked the same. He ran and ran, yet there was no way out. Suddenly, he stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. Desperate, he threw the door open and rushed inside. The dim glow of an old gas lamp illuminated the room. Strange symbols covered the walls, and a worn-out newspaper lay on the wooden table. With trembling hands, Mike picked it up. The headline read, Missing Campers Still Unfound. Since 1982, the number of disappearances in this area has reached 15. Mike's breath hitched. Was this place cursed? Or had he been pulled into some kind of ritual? A faint creaking sound snapped him back to reality. Someone, or something, was approaching the cabin. He quickly blew out the lamp and crouched in the corner. The door slowly creaked open. Mike pressed himself into the corner, holding his breath as he watched the shadow step through the doorway. It was an old woman, clutching a worn-out lantern that flickered weakly. Her tattered dress hung loosely around her frail frame, and deep wrinkles marked her face, a testament to years of hardship. She moved as if sniffing the air, tilting her head toward him, like a predator sensing its prey. Then, in a low, eerie voice, she spoke. You don't belong here. But now you are. If you wish to leave, you must pay the price. Mike's blood turned to ice. Her pale, unblinking eyes were locked onto him. There was no point in hiding anymore. Slowly, he rose to his feet. "I just want to get out of here," he shouted. The woman gave a slow nod. "Then you must face what awaits you." At that moment, a high-pitched scream pierced the air outside. It was followed by laughter, deep, echoing, and unnatural. Mike's instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet felt glued to the floor. The old woman raised a bony hand and pressed it against the symbols on the wall. A sudden gust of wind howled through the cabin, carrying eerie whispers that seemed to come from every direction at once. "They are coming." Mike turned to the door. He had to escape. But when he yanked it open, his breath caught in his throat. The campsite was gone. The trees were gone. Instead, he stood in an ancient stone courtyard, surrounded by flickering candles. Figures stood in a perfect circle around him. People, or things that only resembled people. Their faces were blank, devoid of emotion. One of them slowly opened its mouth. But no words came out. Instead, thick black smoke began to pour from within. Mike stumbled backward in terror, only to feel an icy hand tighten around his wrist. He turned and saw the old woman gazing at him with empty eyes. "Your time is up," she whispered. And in an instant, everything went black. When Mike opened his eyes, the sun was rising. The damp scent of the forest filled his nostrils. He was lying in the mud, his clothes torn and his arms covered in scratches. His head throbbed with pain. He quickly sat up and looked around. The campsite. The tents were still standing. He could hear his friends' voices. In shock, he made his way toward the tent. Just as he approached, one of his friends spotted him. "Mike, dude, where have you been? We've been looking for you all morning." Mike opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. How long had he been missing? Had he really been in the forest, or was the stone courtyard, the people, the woman's voice, was it all just a dream? He reached into his pocket and flinched as his hand brushed against something. Looking down, he realized he was holding a piece of paper. Trembling, he unfolded it. It was an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Missing Campers Still Unfound." Since 1982, the number of disappearances in this area has reached 15. Mike's heart raced wildly. He dropped the paper. This was impossible. As he turned around, he saw shadows among the trees, watching him. And in that moment, he understood. He had returned, but had he truly escaped? Mike was filled with unease. He dropped the newspaper clipping, but his eyes couldn't tear away from the shadows watching him from between the trees. They were there. Quietly, patiently waiting. When one of his friends touched his arm, Mike flinched. "Hey, man, are you okay? You look pale as a ghost." Mike stared at him blankly. His voice trembled as he said, "We need to leave. Now." "What? You just woke up, dude. You don't look good. Did something happen?" Mike didn't know how to explain it. If he told them about the nightmare of the night, they would probably laugh at him. But the feeling inside him was too strong. If they stayed for even one more second, they might never leave again. "Damn it, hurry up and pack," he shouted. At first, his friends thought he was just messing around, but when they saw the genuine fear in his eyes, they reluctantly started gathering their things. 10 minutes later, they packed up the tents and left the campsite. With each step he took, Mike could hear the whispers coming from the depths of the forest. It was as if the beings were allowing him to leave. But on one condition. As Mike and his friends drove down the mountain road, he tried not to look back. The fear inside him hadn't faded since they had arrived at the campsite. He knew something was wrong. Hours later, when they finally arrived home, he felt a little safer. He took a shower, put on fresh clothes, and lay down in his bed. But when he closed his eyes, the strange faces, the black smoke, the stone courtyard kept repeating in his mind. At midnight, he woke up in a cold sweat and noticed that the door to his room was ajar. He was sure he had closed it. Shaking, he threw the blanket off and reached for the light. As his eyes fell on the items on his desk, he froze. There, the newspaper clipping was there again. But this time, it was different. A new line had been added. Mike picked it up and read it with trembling eyes. Missing campers still unfound. Since 1982, the number of disappearances in this area has reached 16. Mike's breath caught in his throat. He had been added to the list. At that moment, he heard a faint whisper from the corner of the room. "You don't belong here. But now you are here." Slowly, he looked up and gazed into the mirror. In the reflection, he saw shadows standing behind him. And in that instant, he understood. He had never truly escaped. He was still a part of that world. This final moment showed that Mike had not broken free from the curse. He was still bound to that world.